On my previous video, we built this tenoning jig, and it works great. But I promised you that some of the parts on here are reusable, specifically the fence. So now I can take this fence and reuse it to make another jig. This new jig will be a cousin to the tenoning jig. In the tenoning jig, the wood is held fast to the jig, and then the saw moves on top. And this jig, the saw is going to be attached to the jig, and the jig and saw together will move on top of the wood. Now there's another side benefit to this jig. It can also be used as a router table, and we'll get to that next. I've already gone ahead and put my layout lines on the MDF. I'm going to go ahead and cut those pieces down and get started. Just like before, we're going to attach the fence to the table with these carriage bolts. In fact, these are the very same carriage bolts as before. Might as well reuse them because you're not going to need them all at the same time. I pre-drill with a small hole so that I don't blow out the MDF too bad on the other side. And then I'll switch over to a 3/8 inch bit and drill in from both sides. Square the tops of the holes for the carriage bolts just like before. And then go ahead and drop them right in. Once your bolts are in place, flip it over, go ahead and put it together. Now we're going to flip it back over so we can set it up to hold our saw. Now I've set my saw into its working position relative to the jig. I want the center line of the arbor lined up with the center of the table. But I need to find a way to attach my saw to this table, and I want to do it in a way that doesn't prohibit it from also working as a router table. So there's a bunch of different ways to do this, including putting some nice bolts in here and screwing it in place, but I don't want to get involved with that right now. What I've decided to do is make a U-shaped foot that's going to fit around the base of my saw and attach with the very same bolts that are holding the fence on underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that out now. To mark out the shape of the foot, put the saw at the center of the table, aligning the arbor with the center, and then we'll just trace out the footprint of our saw. Obviously, every saw will have a different footprint, so if you change your saws, you'll need to change your foot plate. Now I'll just go ahead and cut that out. Well, that sits in there pretty well. Now there's two more things I want to do before I want to call this job done. First of all, I'd like this saw to have some sort of more positive lock to keep it in place. Now I'm just going to glue a piece of MDF here in the back to keep the saw from lifting up. Now you may want something a little more positive, in which case you can put some little clamps in here or all sorts of other solutions, but for me, I think this will be fine. The other problem is that while MDF has many wonderful properties, strength is not one of them. Now this piece here has got these two long narrow bits sticking out. So I'm going to need to laminate something on top of here to make it a little bit stronger. Well, I happen to have this extra map of Pennsylvania, so I'm going to go ahead and use some spray adhesive, laminate it both sides, and hopefully that'll strengthen it up, and besides, maybe it'll look cool. Well, if it's stupid and it works, then it's not stupid. Let's put it together and give it a try on a piece of wood. This is the same tenon rail that we used for the tenoning jig, and I've set this up to cut a dado along the top as if we were building mortise and tenon frame and panel cabinets. Let's see how it works. It's not going to be faster than a dado blade on a table saw, but if you don't have one, this is a good way to make a dado. These are accurate, they've all come out to the same depth, and they've all gone in straight. Part of the reason why is this jig is very heavy. Now that may seem like a disadvantage, but the heavier the jig, the less vibration that it's going to have. To finish out this dado, I'll just take a chisel and clean it right out. If you've done mortise and tenon joinery, and you've done frame and panel construction, you'll recognize these types of joints. Now so far, we've made two major jigs. This first one mills the end so that we can cut the tenon. This second jig allows us to cut an accurate dado down the side of a rail so that it can receive a panel. The third major problem in mortise and tenon joinery is cutting the mortise, but I don't think I can do that with a circular saw. In order to do that, we're going to need to introduce a new tool called a router. Now, I haven't been using this because I've been operating without 110 volt electricity for some time, and I only have battery powered tools. However, on this location I have all sorts of luxuries like running water and actual shade. So anyway, let's move forward and I'll show you a few things we can do with this tool, starting off with the jig we just made.